It was 11:47 p.m. when Mark Collins heard the water running. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding in the darkness of his small two-bedroom apartment. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. That familiar sound of dishes clinking, water splashing, the soft hum of someone working in his kitchen. But it had been 2 years since anyone other than him had touched those dishes. 2 years since the cancer had taken Sarah. 2 years since he'd become both mother and father to their 6-year-old son, Ethan. Mark rubbed his eyes and listened. The sound continued. Someone was definitely in his kitchen. His mind raced through possibilities. Had he forgotten to lock the door? Was someone breaking in? He grabbed his phone, ready to dial 911, and crept down the narrow hallway. The light from the kitchen spilled onto the worn carpet, casting long shadows. He could see a silhouette moving back and forth, methodical and calm. Not threatening, almost domestic. When he reached the doorway, Mark stopped breathing. There, standing at his sink with her back to him, was Emma Richardson, his neighbor from 3B, the kindergarten teacher who always smiled at Ethan in the elevator. She wore jeans and an oversized sweater, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. Her hands moved efficiently through the mountain of dishes that had accumulated over the past week, maybe 2 weeks, if Mark was being honest with himself. The dishes he'd been too exhausted to face after working double shifts at the construction site and getting Ethan fed, bathed, and into bed. "Emma?" His voice came out rougher than intended. She jumped, spinning around with soapy hands raised. "Oh God, Mark, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. She looked down at the dishes, then back at him, her cheeks flushing. "This is so weird. Should explain." Mark stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to catch up. "How did you—" "The door? Ethan," she said softly. "This afternoon when I got home from school, he was sitting in the hallway. Outside your door. He said he was waiting for you to get home from work, that Mrs. Chen from downstairs was supposed to check on him, but she fell asleep." Emma's voice carried concern, not judgment. "He looked so small sitting there, Mark, so alone. I couldn't just leave him." The words hit Mark like a physical blow. He'd been running on fumes for so long that corners were being cut without him even realizing it. Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who'd offered to help, was in her 70s. Of course she'd dozed off. "I brought him to my apartment," Emma continued, her voice gentle. "Fed him some dinner. He did his homework at my kitchen table. He's really good at math, by the way." She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "When you got home around 9, I brought him back. But Mark, he gave me his key. He said—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He said you might need help. That you were tired. That maybe I could come back and help with the dishes." Mark felt something crack open in his chest. He'd worked so hard to keep everything together, to prove he could do this alone, to honor Sarah's memory by being enough for their son. But here was a 6-year-old boy, still grieving his mother, now worried about his father falling apart. "I should have asked," Emma said, setting down the sponge. "This was overstepping. I'll go—" "No." The word came out before Mark could stop it. He cleared his throat. "No, thank you. For helping Ethan, for being here." They stood in the fluorescent kitchen light. Two people who'd exchanged maybe a dozen words over the past year, suddenly connected by a little boy's cry for help, disguised as a door key. Emma turned back to the sink. "I'm almost done. You should go back to bed. You look exhausted." Mark should have been angry, should have been embarrassed, should have sent her away and handled his own problems. But instead, he found himself walking to the counter and picking up a dish towel. "I'll dry," he said. They worked in silence for a while, falling into an unexpected rhythm. Emma washed, Mark dried. The pile of clean dishes grew, and for the first time in 2 years, Mark Collins didn't feel quite so alone in the overwhelming task of holding his life together. What he didn't know was that Ethan was awake in his room, peeking through the crack in his door, watching them work side by side. The little boy smiled in the darkness, his small hand pressed against the doorframe. "She's still here," he whispered to himself, like a prayer being answered. "She's still here." The next morning came too early, as mornings always did. Mark's alarm screamed at 5:30 a.m., pulling him from the first decent sleep he'd had in weeks. For a moment in that space between dreams and reality, He forgot about the night before. Then he smelled something that made his eyes snap open. Coffee. Fresh coffee. And was that bacon? He stumbled out of bed and into the kitchen, where he found a note written in neat handwriting on the back of an envelope. Saw you were out of breakfast food. Hope you don't mind, I had extras. Emma, 3B on. The counter sat a small container with scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast. Next to it, a lunchbox with Ethan's name written on a sticky note. Inside, a carefully packed meal that wasn't the usual peanut butter sandwich Mark threw together in the mornings. Mark stood in his empty kitchen, staring at this simple act of kindness, and felt tears prick his eyes. He couldn't remember the last time someone had taken care of him. Since Sarah died, he'd become a machine, wake up, work, parent, collapse, repeat. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be helped, to matter to someone outside the narrow circle of his survival. He heard Ethan's door creak open. His son appeared in Star Wars pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction, rubbing his eyes. When Ethan saw the food on the counter, his whole face lit up. Did Miss Emma come back? The hope in his voice was heartbreaking. Mark knelt down to Ethan's level. Buddy, we need to talk about yesterday. You can't give people our key, and you can't sit in the hallway alone. If Mrs. Chen falls asleep, you come to my phone, okay? Ethan's face fell. Are you mad at Miss Emma? No, son. I'm not mad at anyone. I'm just... Mark struggled to find the right words. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that you're drowning, that you're terrified of failing him, that accepting help feels like admitting defeat? I'm just trying to keep us safe. Miss Emma makes you smile, Ethan said with the brutal honesty only children possess. You don't smile anymore, Daddy. Not since Mommy went to heaven. The words hung in the air between them, a truth Mark had been avoiding for 2 years. He pulled Ethan into a tight hug, breathing in the little boy's smell of him. Shampoo and sleep and innocence that needed protecting. I smile, Mark whispered. I smile at you. Not a real smile, Ethan said into his shoulder. Not like before. Mark had no answer for that. They went through their morning routine. Mark microwaved the breakfast Emma left, got Ethan dressed and ready for school. The lunchbox sat on the counter like a question Mark wasn't ready to answer. At 7:15, they headed downstairs. Mark had to drop Ethan at the before-school program on his way to the construction site across town. Another service he paid for, another institution raising his son because there weren't enough hours in the day for him to do it all. The elevator dinged on the 3rd floor. Emma stepped in, her teacher bag over her shoulder, dressed in a floral dress with a cardigan. She smiled at Ethan first, then cautiously at Mark. Good morning. Morning, Mark said, suddenly aware of his paint-stained work jacket and the exhaustion probably written across his face. Thank you. For the breakfast. And for everything last night. It was nothing. Emma knelt down to Ethan's level. Hey, buddy. Ready for school today? We're doing art. You're going to love it, Ethan beamed. Will you be my teacher when I'm in kindergarten next year? Maybe, Emma said, ruffling his hair. If you're lucky. They rode down in comfortable silence, but Mark felt the weight of unasked questions. Why had Emma really come back last night? Why did she have extra breakfast? Why was she being so kind to a struggling single father she barely knew? As they reached the lobby, Emma touched Mark's arm gently. Can I ask you something? Mark nodded, not trusting his voice. I know this might sound forward, but I'm home by 4 every day. If you ever need someone to watch Ethan after school, just until you get off work, I'd be happy to help, no charge. She glanced at Ethan, who was pressing all the elevator buttons now that they'd exited. No kid should have to sit alone in a hallway waiting for his dad to come home. And no dad should have to choose between paying rent and paying for childcare. Mark felt his throat tighten. Pride warred with desperation. Independence with the crushing weight of responsibility. He'd been raised to handle his own problems, to never ask for handouts, to be a man who provided. But what kind of man let his son sit alone in a hallway? I can't afford... I'm not asking for money, Emma interrupted gently. I'm asking to help. There's a difference. Mark looked at his son, then back at Emma. In her eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine human connection with no ulterior motive. Just kindness for kindness' sake, why? He asked. Why would you do this? Emma's smile was sad and knowing. Because 6 years ago, when I was student teaching and could barely afford groceries, a single mom named Carol let me eat dinner at her house 3 nights a week. She told me we help each other. That's what we do. I promised myself that when I was stable enough, I'd pay it forward. She paused. So let me pay it forward, Mark, please. Before Mark could respond, Ethan ran back to them, throwing his arms around Emma's legs. Please, Daddy. Can Miss Emma be my friend? Mark looked down at his son's hopeful face, at Emma's patient expression, at the life preserver being thrown to a drowning man. Slowly, painfully, he let go of the pride that had been holding him under. Okay, he whispered. Okay, thank you. Emma's smile was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Great. I'll see you after school, Ethan. We'll have snacks and do homework, and your dad can pick you up whenever he's ready. As they parted ways on the sidewalk, Emma heading to her elementary school, Mark and Ethan to the before care program, Mark felt something shift in his chest. The crushing weight was still there, but now there was something else too, something that felt dangerously close to hope. He didn't know that across town, Emma was sitting in her classroom before her students arrived, taking deep breaths and telling herself not to get too attached. She'd learned the hard way what happened when you opened your heart to other people's families. But there was something about Ethan's sad eyes and Mark's exhausted strength that had cracked through her carefully maintained walls. Some people, she thought, are worth the risk of getting hurt. Some people are worth showing up for, even when it's easier to walk away. 3 weeks passed, and a new rhythm emerged. Every day at 3:45 p.m., Ethan would burst through Emma's apartment door like a small tornado. Backpack flying, shoes kicked off, shouting, "Miss Emma," with the kind of joy that made her heart hurt in the best way. They'd settled into a routine: snack first, usually apple slices and peanut butter, homework second. Ethan was indeed gifted at math, and then whatever creative project Emma had planned. Painting, building with blocks, reading stories on her worn but comfortable couch. And every evening around 6:30, Mark would knock on her door with that particular expression of gratitude and guilt that she was beginning to know well. He'd thank her profusely, apologize for being late, promise to make it up to her somehow. And every evening, Emma would wave off his concerns and watch as father and son disappeared into apartment 3C, their voices fading as they started their nighttime routine. But things were shifting in ways none of them had quite acknowledged yet. Mark started arriving earlier, 6 o'clock, then 5:45. Not because work ended earlier, but because he was rushing through his post-shift cleanup to get back home. To get back to them, he'd find Emma and Ethan on the living room floor, building elaborate structures with blocks or reading together, and something in his chest would tighten and release at the same time. Emma started preparing dinner for 3 instead of 1. Casseroles that accidentally were too big for one person. Pasta dishes that happened to be ready right when Mark arrived. At first, Mark refused, insisting he couldn't impose more than he already had. But Ethan would look up at him with those big eyes and ask, "Can't we stay, Daddy? Just for dinner?" And Mark would stay. They'd sit at Emma's small kitchen table, Mark still in his work clothes, Ethan chattering about his day, Emma serving food and feeling something dangerous bloom in her chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be simple. Help a struggling family, pay forward the kindness she'd received, maintain appropriate boundaries. But somewhere between Ethan's laughter and Mark's rare, genuine smiles, Emma had started imagining permanence. She'd started setting 3 plates automatically. She'd started buying Ethan's favorite juice boxes without thinking. She'd started staying up late thinking about the man in apartment 3C and how his eyes crinkled when he laughed, which happened more frequently now. One Thursday evening, Mark lingered after Ethan had gone to brush his teeth in Emma's bathroom. He'd left a toothbrush there last week, another sign of how blurred these lines had become. "Emma," Mark said, his voice serious. "This has to stop." Emma felt her stomach drop. "What?" "All of this." Mark gestured around the apartment. "The childcare, the dinners, everything. I can't keep taking from you without giving back. It's not right." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by something that felt like disappointment. "Mark, I told you." "I know what you told me," he interrupted, running a hand through his hair. A gesture she'd learned meant he was stressed. But I wasn't raised to be a charity case. Let me pay you something, or let me fix things around your apartment. I noticed your kitchen cabinet is broken, and the tile in your bathroom is coming loose. I could help with that, please. I need to contribute something. Emma studied him for a long moment. She understood pride. God, did she understand it. After her divorce 3 years ago, she'd rebuilt her entire life from scratch, refusing help from parents who'd warned her not to marry young, not to give up her plans for someone else's dreams. She'd wanted to prove them wrong, to prove she could make it alone. But that kind of pride was lonely, and watching Mark torture himself with the same burden she'd once carried felt unbearable. Okay, she said softly. You can fix the cabinet. But Mark, this isn't charity, and you're not taking from me. You're giving me something too, Mark frowned. What could I possibly be giving you? You're the one doing all the purpose, Emma interrupted. You're giving me purpose. Do you know how quiet this apartment gets? How empty my evenings were before Ethan started coming over? She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. I chose a career helping kids because I love it. But then I come home to silence. No family, no anyone. You and Ethan, you've given me something to look forward to, someone to care about. That's not nothing, Mark, that's everything. The air between them shifted, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Mark took a step closer and Emma's breath caught. Emma, Daddy! Ethan's voice shattered the moment. He bounded out of the bathroom, face dripping with water. Can we watch a movie at Miss Emma's house? Please, just tonight? Mark stepped back and the spell broke. Buddy, we've already taken up enough of Miss Emma's time. Actually, Emma heard herself say, I was planning to watch Toy Story tonight. Could use some company. Ethan's face lit up like Christmas morning. Mark looked at Emma with something that might have been gratitude, might have been yearning, might have been the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. Toy Story it is, Mark said quietly. They settled onto the couch, Ethan between them. Blanket pulled up to his chin, clutching the throw pillow Emma had designated as his. The movie played, but Emma was acutely aware of Mark's presence beside her, the warmth of his arm inches from hers. Halfway through, Ethan's head drooped onto Emma's shoulder, his breathing evening out into sleep. Should I take him home? Mark whispered. Let him rest, Emma whispered back. He looks comfortable. They sat in the flickering light of the television, Ethan breathing softly between them, and for just a moment, they looked like what they weren't, a family, complete, whole, together. Mark turned his head, finding Emma already looking at him. The semi-darkness, his eyes held questions he wasn't ready to ask, and Emma's held answers she wasn't ready to give. Thank you, Mark said, so softly she almost didn't hear it, for all of this. For being here, for seeing us. Thank you for letting me, Emma replied. Later that night, after Mark had carried a sleeping Ethan back to their apartment, after Emma had cleaned up the popcorn and folded the blanket, she stood at her window and looked out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mark. The cabinet tomorrow? I get off at 5, Emma smiled, typing back, perfect. We'll order pizza after. She didn't add what she was really thinking, that she was falling for this accidental family that had formed in the spaces between loneliness and need. That every day Ethan ran through her door. Every evening Mark smiled at her over dinner. She was getting more attached to something that wasn't really hers. Across the hall, Mark lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Ethan asleep in the next room. He thought about Emma's laugh, about how natural she looked with his son, about the way his apartment felt emptier now that they'd left hers. Sarah's photo sat on his nightstand, her smile frozen in time. Mark picked it up, running his thumb over the glass. I think I'm starting to feel again, he whispered to the photograph. Is that okay? Am I allowed to? But he couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't name what was growing between Emma and him. Couldn't admit that when he rushed home from work, he wasn't just rushing to pick up his son. He was rushing to see her too. In separate apartments, separated by just a wall and a hallway, two people lay awake, thinking about what they were building and terrified of what might happen if they admitted how much it already meant. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after Emma had first washed Mark's dishes. It started with a phone call. Mark was on site, securing steel beams on the 15th floor of a new downtown building, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Mrs. Chen's number. His stomach dropped. She only called for emergencies. Mark? Her elderly voice trembled. I'm so sorry, but I had to call an ambulance. I'm having chest pains. They're taking me to St. Mary's. I can't watch Ethan today after school. Don't worry about Ethan, Mark said immediately, his mind already racing. Just focus on yourself. I'll figure something out, he hung up and checked the time. 1:45 p.m. Ethan got out of school at 3:15. Emma had a staff meeting today. She'd mentioned it last night at dinner and wouldn't be home until 6. Mark's boss was already on his case about leaving early too often. They were behind schedule, and every hour mattered. But Ethan mattered more. Mark climbed down from the beam, found his foreman, and explained the situation. The conversation went exactly as expected. Tight deadline. Can't afford to lose workers, already understaffed. You've left early 3 times this month. I'm sorry, Mark said, hearing his father's voice in his head telling him real men don't abandon their responsibilities. But I have to go. Then don't bother coming back tomorrow, the foreman said. I need guys I can count on. The words hit Mark like a punch to the gut, but he just nodded. He grabbed his stuff and headed to his truck, hands shaking. That job paid $24 an hour, double what most construction jobs offered. It covered their rent, Ethan's before care, groceries, everything. And he'd just walked away from it. But what choice did he have? He called the school, explained he'd be picking Ethan up directly. Then he sat in his truck for a long moment, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, and let himself break just a little. 2 years of holding everything together, and it was all falling apart over one afternoon. When Mark picked up Ethan, his son immediately sensed something was wrong. Daddy? Why are you here? Where's Miss Emma? Change of plans, buddy, Mark said, forcing brightness into his voice. We're going to have a guy's afternoon. Just you and me. They went to the park, but Mark couldn't focus on pushing the swing or playing on the jungle gym. His mind churned with calculations. How long the savings would last. Whether he could find another job quickly. What would happen if he couldn't? He'd been scraping by, and now he was about to fall off the edge entirely. His phone rang. Emma. Mark? Mrs. Chen told me what happened. Is everything okay? I can cancel my meeting and… No, Mark said, harsher than intended. No, Emma, I've got it handled. A pause. Mark, you don't have to do everything alone. Let me help. I said I've got it handled. He softened his tone, aware of Ethan watching. I'll talk to you later. He hung up, immediately regretted it, but didn't call back. Pride tasted bitter, but it was familiar. Comfortable even. That evening, he didn't take Ethan to Emma's apartment. Instead, they went home to 3C, where Mark made boxed mac and cheese and tried to pretend everything was fine. Ethan pushed the food around his plate, quiet in the way children get when they sense their parents' distress. Can we go see Miss Emma? Ethan asked. I want to show her my drawing from school. Not tonight, son, but we always… I said not tonight. Mark snapped. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Mark immediately felt like the worst father in the world, but he was drowning, and he didn't know how to reach for the life preserver without admitting he was going under. After putting Ethan to bed, Mark sat in his dark living room staring at the bills piled on the coffee table. Rent due in 2 weeks, electric bill overdue, Ethan's before care payment late, and now no job. A knock at the door. He ignored it. Another knock, more insistent. Mark, I know you're in there. Emma, of course. He opened the door to find her standing in the hallway, arms crossed, her teacher face on, the one she used when students tried to hide that they hadn't done their homework. You can't just shut me out, she said, pushing past him into the apartment. Emma, this isn't a good time. Too bad, she turned to face him. What happened today? And don't say nothing. Mrs. Chen told me you left work early and you've been weird all evening. I lost my job, Mark said flatly, because I had to pick up my son from school. That's what happened. And now I have 2 weeks of savings, maybe 3 if I'm careful, before I can't pay rent. So forgive me if I'm not in the mood for company. Emma's face softened. Mark, don't. He held up a hand. Don't give me that look. Don't tell me it'll be okay. Don't offer to lend me money or let Ethan stay with you more or whatever you're thinking. I've taken enough from you. I've become exactly what I swore I'd never be. A charity case who can't handle his own life. Is that what you think this is? Emma's voice rose. Charity? You think I've been spending every evening with you and Ethan out of pity? What else would it be? Mark shot back, his fear manifesting as anger. I'm a broke single dad who couldn't even keep a simple construction job. You're a successful teacher who has her life together. Why would you want anything to do with this mess unless you felt sorry for us? The words hung in the air, cruel and cutting. Emma took a step back as if he'd slapped her. You really believe that? Her voice shook. After everything these past 6 weeks, you think I've been forcing myself to care about you? About Ethan? I don't know, Mark said honestly. I don't know what any of this is, Emma. I just know I can't keep taking from you while giving nothing back. I can't keep pretending I have my life together when clearly I don't. And I can't— His voice broke. I can't watch you realize what a disaster I am and walk away. It's better if we just stop now. Emma stared at him for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. You're scared. Damn right I'm scared, Mark admitted. I'm terrified. Failing Ethan, of losing everything Sarah and I built, of dragging you down with us. So you're pushing me away first, Emma said. Before I can leave. Mark said nothing, which was answer enough. Emma wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders. Fine, if that's what you want. But you should know something, Mark Collins. She met his gaze directly. I wasn't here out of pity. I was here because Ethan makes me laugh. Because being around you two feels like home. Because somewhere in the last 6 weeks I stopped thinking of you as my neighbor and started thinking of you as— She trailed off. But it doesn't matter now, does it? She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob. When you're ready to stop sabotaging the good things in your life because you're afraid of losing them, you know where I live. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Mark stood in his empty living room, surrounded by the ruins of his life, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of all. In the bedroom, Ethan lay awake, his small hands pressed to his ears, trying to block out the argument. He'd heard his daddy yelling, heard Miss Emma crying, and now the apartment felt cold and empty again, just like it had before she'd started washing the dishes that night. He climbed out of bed, padded to the window, and looked across the small courtyard to where a light glowed in apartment 3B. Miss Emma's apartment. She was probably crying, he thought, because of his daddy. Ethan pressed his hand to the glass and whispered into the darkness, Please don't leave us, Miss Emma. Please. 4 days passed in suffocating silence. Mark sent out resumes, made phone calls, went to interviews. Nothing. The market was tight, and being known as the guy who'd walked off a job, even for good reasons, had spread through the local construction network faster than he'd imagined possible. He'd burned a bridge he didn't know was the only road forward. Each evening, he'd cook dinner for Ethan in their quiet apartment, help with homework at their small table, read bedtime stories alone. And each evening, he'd listen for sounds from apartment 3B, waiting for Emma's laugh, her footsteps, any sign that she was still there, still okay. Still. But the silence was complete. Ethan had become withdrawn. He did his homework mechanically, ate his meals without complaint, went to bed when told. The joy that had returned to his small face over the past 6 weeks had evaporated, leaving behind a child who looked old, beyond his years, who understood in that way children do, that something precious had been broken. On the 5th day, Friday afternoon, Mark came home from yet another fruitless job search to find Ethan sitting in the hallway again, outside apartment 3B, knocking softly on Emma's door. Ethan. Mark's voice was sharp with fear. What are you doing? His son looked up at him, tears streaming down his face. I miss her, Daddy. I miss Miss Emma. Why won't she open the door? Is she mad at me? Mark's heart shattered. He sank down next to Ethan, pulling him close. Nobody. She's not mad at you. She could never be mad at you. Then why won't she see us? Did we do something wrong? How do you explain adult fears to a child? How do you tell your 6-year-old that you pushed away someone good because you were terrified of needing them? That you'd rather be alone than risk another loss? I did something wrong, Mark admitted. I hurt Miss Emma's feelings. I said some things I shouldn't have said. Then say sorry, Ethan said with the simple clarity of childhood. That's what you tell me to do when I hurt someone. It's more complicated than— No, it's not. Ethan pulled away, looking at his father with Sarah's eyes, clear and unwavering. You love her, and she loves us. I know she does. So why are you making us all sad? The word hung in the air between them. Love. Mark hadn't let himself think it, hadn't dared name what had been growing in the spaces between dinner conversations and shared laughter. Before Mark could respond, apartment 3B's door opened. Emma stood there in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair messy, eyes red-rimmed. She looked at Ethan first, her face crumpling at the sight of his tears. Oh, sweetheart, she said, kneeling down. Come here. Ethan launched himself into her arms, sobbing. I missed you so much, Miss Emma. Please don't be mad at us. Please don't go away. I'm not going anywhere, Emma whispered, holding him tight. I'm right here. I'm right here. Over Ethan's head, her eyes met Mark's. In that moment, he saw everything. The hurt he'd caused, the love she'd been trying to offer, the family they could be if he was brave enough to reach for it. Emma, he said hoarsely, I'm sorry. I was wrong. About all of it. She didn't respond, just kept holding Ethan, but her eyes stayed locked on Mark's. Can we come in? Mark asked quietly. Please? Emma nodded, standing up with Ethan still clinging to her. They went inside and Mark closed the door behind them, shutting out the world for just a moment. Emma set Ethan on the couch, turning to face Mark. You can't do that again, she said, her voice shaking. You can't push me away every time you're scared. That's not how this works, I know, Mark said. I know, and I'm sorry. I've been alone so long, Emma, handling everything alone. And when you came into our lives, it felt too good to be real. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. For you to realize we're too much work, too broken, too human? Emma finished. Mark, I'm not Sarah. The name hung between them. Mark flinched. I'm not trying to replace her. Emma continued gently. I could never replace her. She was Ethan's mother. Your wife, that's sacred. But Mark, she's gone. And you're still here. Ethan's still here. And you deserve to have help. You deserve to have support. You deserve to have— She stopped, swallowed hard. You deserve to have someone who cares about you. Both of you. I lost my job, Mark said, needing her to understand the full picture. I have maybe 3 weeks before I can't pay rent. I'm applying everywhere, but nothing's coming through. I'm a disaster, Emma. I'm not good at accepting help. I'm not good at letting people in. I'm not good at being vulnerable. Emma stepped closer. Neither am I. Do you know why I left my marriage? Because my ex-husband wanted kids and I found out I couldn't have them. And instead of facing that together, I pushed him away. Told him to find someone who could give him what he wanted. I chose loneliness over the risk of being loved despite my broken parts. Her voice broke. So when I see you doing the same thing, choosing isolation over connection because you're scared, I recognize it, Mark. Because I've been there. And I'm telling you, don't make my mistake. Don't choose pride over love. Don't choose fear over family. Mark felt tears streaming down his face. I don't know how to do this. How to need someone. How to let someone need me back. Then we'll figure it out together, Emma said simply. That's what people do when they care about each other. They figure it out. Together. Ethan had been watching them from the couch, his small face serious. Now he spoke, his voice clear in the quiet apartment. Daddy, remember what Mommy used to say? About the dishes? Mark looked at his son, confused. What do you mean, buddy? She said. Ethan scrunched up his face, trying to remember. She said doing dishes together was her favorite part of the day. Because it meant you were a team. That's why Miss Emma washed our dishes that night, right? Because she wanted to be on our team. The memory hit Mark like a wave. Sarah, laughing at the sink, handing him dishes to dry while they talked about their days. We're a good team, Mark Collins, she'd say. The best team. He looked at Emma, really looked at her. This woman who'd shown up in his kitchen at midnight. Who'd fed his son and held his heart without asking for anything in return. Who'd offered partnership when he'd only known how to accept charity. I've been so stupid, Mark whispered. Yes, Emma agreed, but she was smiling now, tears on her cheeks. But we can work with stupid. Stupid can learn, Mark laughed, a broken sound that turned into a sob. I don't have anything to offer you right now. No job, no savings, no— Stop, Emma interrupted, closing the distance between them. Stop listing your deficits like they define your worth. You're a good father, a hard worker, a man who shows up even when it's hard. That's not nothing, Mark. That's everything. I'm scared, he admitted.
Of failing you.
Of failing Ethan. Of losing everything again. I'm scared too, Emma said softly. Of caring this much. Of building a family that isn't really mine. Of watching you pull away every time things get hard. She reached up, cupping his face in her hands. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe alone. Wouldn't you? Mark covered her hands with his, holding them against his face like a lifeline. I would. God, I would. Then stop pushing me away, Emma whispered. Let me help. Let me be here. Let me love you both. The word love hung in the air, real and terrifying and perfect. I don't deserve, and Mark started. None of us deserve anything, Emma said. We just get chances. And we decide whether to take them or let fear choose for us. She paused. What do you choose, Mark? Mark looked at Ethan, who was watching them with hope written across his small face. Then back at Emma, whose eyes held patience and love and the promise of a future he'd stopped letting himself imagine. I choose you, Mark said. I choose us. I choose to stop being afraid and start being grateful that you showed up in my kitchen that night. Emma smiled, and it was like sunrise after the longest night. Good, because I wasn't going anywhere anyway. You're stuck with me now, promise? Ethan piped up from the couch. Emma turned to him, holding out her arms. Promise, Ethan ran to them. And suddenly the three of them were tangled together, arms wrapped around each other, tears mixing with laughter, broken pieces finding ways to fit together. I love you both, Emma whispered into the embrace. I know it's fast and crazy and maybe too soon to say, but I do. I love you. I love you too, Ethan said immediately, like he'd been waiting for permission. Mark pulled back just enough to look at Emma's face. I love you, he said, and felt the truth of it settle into his bones. I think I started falling in love with you that first night, when I found you in my kitchen. I was just too scared to admit it. Well, Emma said, wiping tears from her face, now you have. So what do we do now? Mark thought about the unpaid bills on his coffee table, the job prospects that kept falling through, the uncertain future stretching ahead. Then he looked at the woman in his arms and the sun beaming at both of them, and realized that uncertainty didn't have to mean hopeless. Now, Mark said, we figure it out together like a team. Like a family, Ethan corrected. Like a family, Mark agreed. 3 months later, Mark stood in Emma's kitchen, their kitchen now, washing dishes while she dried. Ethan sat at the table, carefully copying spelling words into his homework notebook. The apartment was a comfortable chaos of merged lives. Mark's tools in the corner waiting to fix the perpetually loose cabinet. Ethan's drawings covering the refrigerator. Emma's books mixing with Mark's on the shelves. Mark had found work with a smaller construction company. Better hours. Lower pay, but a boss who understood that sometimes life required flexibility. Emma had officially registered as Ethan's emergency contact at school. They'd moved slowly, carefully, building trust and routines in a life that honored what had been while embracing what could be. Some nights, Mark would wake up and find Sarah's photograph on his nightstand, and he'd whisper to her about the woman who'd walked into their lives. She's good to him, he'd say. She's good to both of us. I hope you'd be okay with this. I hope you'd understand. And in the quiet of those moments, he'd swear he could feel Sarah's approval, not as a haunting presence, but as a blessing. Be happy, he imagined her saying. You both deserve to be happy. Penny for your thoughts? Emma asked, bumping his shoulder with hers. Mark looked at her, at the woman who'd shown up with compassion when he'd needed it most, who'd stayed when he'd tried to push her away, who'd chosen to love his broken pieces back together. Just thinking about how a pile of dirty dishes changed my life, he said. Emma laughed. Our life, she corrected. It changed our life. From the table, Ethan looked up. Miss Emma? Can I call you something else? Since you're not just my teacher anymore. Emma set down the dish towel, her eyes suddenly bright. What did you have in mind, sweetheart? Ethan bit his lip, nervous. Maybe just Emma? Or, he glanced at Mark, uncertain. Mark knelt beside his son. What do you want to call her, buddy? I want to call her Mom, Ethan whispered. But I don't know if that's okay, because I already have a mom, even if she's in heaven. Emma knelt too, taking Ethan's small hands in hers. You do have a mom, and she'll always be your mom. Nothing changes that. But here's the thing about love, Ethan. It doesn't run out. You can love your mom in heaven and love someone here on earth too. Your heart is big enough for both, so I can call you Mom? Ethan's voice was so hopeful it hurt. If you want to, Emma said, tears streaming down her face. I would be honored. Do honored. Mom, Ethan tested the word, then said it again with more confidence. Mom. He threw his arms around Emma and she held him tight, looking up at Mark over their son's head. In her eyes, Mark saw everything they'd built together, the patience, the trust, the love that had grown in the spaces between fear and faith. Later that night, after Ethan was asleep in his room, the apartment now filled with the sounds of a child's breathing, Mark and Emma sat on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. We should probably talk about the future, Emma said quietly. About what we're building here. I know, Mark said. I've been thinking about it too. And? Mark pulled a small box from his pocket. Not a ring box, but something else. He opened it to reveal a simple house key. I know it's not much, he said. And I know we're still figuring things out. But Emma Richardson, would you consider making this official? Would you let us move in permanently? Would you be my partner in this crazy, beautiful, terrifying adventure of building a family? Emma took the key, turning it over in her hands. Is this your way of proposing that we live together? It's my way of saying I choose you, Mark said. Every day I choose you. I choose us. And when the time is right, when Ethan's ready, when we're ready, I'm going to ask you to marry me. But for now, this felt like the right next step. Emma closed her fingers around the key. I choose you too, she whispered. I choose all of this. The mess and the beauty and everything in between. They sat in comfortable silence, the city lights twinkling through the window, the sound of Ethan's soft snoring drifting from the bedroom. And Mark thought about how life could break you into 1,000 pieces and then, if you were brave enough, let love put you back together in new and unexpected ways. He thought about a 6-year-old boy sitting in a hallway, so worried about his father that he gave away their key to a stranger, about a woman kind enough to wash dishes at midnight for people she barely knew, about how the smallest acts of compassion could cascade into everything. She's still here, Mark whispered, echoing his son's words from that first night. Emma looked up at him. That's what Ethan said the night you first washed our dishes. He was peeking through his door, watching us work side by side, and he whispered, She's still here. Mark's voice caught. Like it was a miracle. Like you staying was the answer to a prayer he'd been too young to know how to say. Emma pressed her face into Mark's shoulder. I am still here, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. Outside, the city hummed with life. Millions of stories unfolding in millions of apartments. Millions of people finding their way through darkness toward light. But in apartment 3B, a new family had formed from the ruins of loss and the courage of connection. And in the kitchen, the dishes sat clean and dry in the rack, waiting for tomorrow when they would be used again. When breakfast would be made, and lunches packed, and life would continue in all its messy, beautiful, imperfect glory. Because that's what families do. They show up, they stay. They wash dishes together late at night and call it love. They choose each other every single day and call it home.